Good morning, campers. Welcome to Radio Camp Half Blood, a Percy Jackson read-along podcast, and I am your host, Zack.
And I'm B.
And this week we read I Settle My Tab.
Yeah, chapter 20-something. 21.
21? If I want to use a big boy word, the penultimate chapter.
It is well, is that really that much of a big boy word? It is used in Lemony Snicket, which is for adolescent children. I feel really weird that we're almost done with this book. The longest time I've ever taken to read a book that I actually ended up finishing. It's been such a strange process.
The weird thing is that I'm used to doing stuff like this because I used to read books instead of just rereading books all the time. I would read a chapter a night before I went to bed of a book that I liked. So this is something I'm used to.
I really didn't know what to expect going into this book, so it's kind of interesting to finally see everything coming to fruition after months of poring over each individual chapter. This kind of finally felt like we are getting the payoff of a lot of the stuff set up way in the beginning. We finally get to meet a few important people. We find out some important things.
And also we figure out who the true villain is of the story, as well as a lot of interesting tidbits of information.
Yeah, there's a couple true villains of the story, depending on how literal you're talking.
There's a lot of villains in this chapter, and I forgot that a lot of the stuff in this book is... This part is just like, everyone's terrible, but, there's still a little hope in the world. It's kind of like opening up Pandora's box. Once all the evil was unleashed, the last thing that was left in the box was hope.
Yeah, it's really weird to, have the buildup of... Should I mention that they meet Zeus and Poseidon?
If they've made it this far in this podcast...
Yeah, they've made it this far. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of rushing ahead. It's weird to finally meet them after... kind of the whole, machinations of this plot have been about their petty squabbling, and I guess also Hades and a few other people, or gods. It's weird to not say people, but to finally, meet them as characters is strange.
The one thing, I guess, before we really start this episode, if we both sound really gravelly, we just came out of a 12-hour live stream yesterday.
Yeah, I hope I don't really sound gravelly so much as I sound. It's sort of like that John Mulaney bit, that child, that terrible child needs to get sleep.
Yeah, so we did a 12-hour live stream for a charity event for one of our friends, Vinny, who does the Pretend Wizards podcast. Him and a couple of the friends of his podcast came and did a 12-hour live stream with us where we played D&D, read terrible fan fictions, and did some choose-your-own-adventure stories.
Yeah, it was an interesting sort of itinerary of stuff that we did. We kind of closed out doing a weird dramatic reading of My Immortal, which went to a weird place. There was just a lot going on.
But it was fun. We raised a lot of money, and I'm really happy about that. Even raising just $1 would have been enough. So, B, what did you think of this chapter?
I kind of mentioned earlier, I really like this chapter because it feels like all of the threads are finally coming together, so to speak. There's been a ton of build up, and obviously we had sort of this rising action with a lot of fight scenes, and there was Ares and the fight on the beach and the whole thing with Hades and the Helm of Darkness. A lot of stuff has happened, but now we're kind of finally getting to the point where we know basically what's going on.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, I'm going to try so hard not to use the bingo board because every time we've been able to fill it, so I'm going to try to use different references, but it's there's a lot of times in movies and stuff where the last before everything gets resolved, everything's put up in a nice little bow. Here, everything not necessarily is put up into a nice little bow.
Yeah, I mean, I also have to bear in mind that I know that this is a series, so it's not everything is all going to be wrapped up. Not to say that even if a one-off book has to have an ending that makes everything tie up neatly, but I know that there's a furthering of the story in other books, and there's sort of also supplemental material stuff that takes place in the same universe.
Well, this is my little movie rant, and also about new books, is that a lot of people now assume that you can just write a series instead of just a standalone book, so no matter the ending, for some reason they always leave it open-ended. There's never really a resolve, if that makes any sense. Everything needs to have a sequel, needs to be planned.
Yeah, the freedom to make a sequel, because they're oh, well, sequels make a lot of money, or whatever. Trilogies are such a thing. I feel I don't know, what really started that? I guess the Hunger Games is really what I always think of when I think of children's trilogies.
See, the problem is, I'd think earlier than that because prior to that, one of the first sequels was Son of Kong, which in the first King Kong, Kong dies.
Well, yeah,
So
I mean,
it's like,
obviously sequels have been around forever, but I'm like specifically like the way that it functions now with like YA. I guess like like Ding Ding Harry Potter, you know.
see, the way you would have to look at it be is I think the first time that actually started, I can actually pinpoint it, and that was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2. Because then there was this weird trend of movies that are trilogies.
Right. Yeah, like separating things.
Yeah, separating them into parts to make more money.
Well,
It's
yeah,
like,
like The Hobbit did that with the movie where they separated it, and I think in general there's like this sense that like, oh, well, I could write one story or I could write multiple stories and I get more money the more stories I make. Not to say that everyone does that with just that motivation in mind, but it kind of feels that way.
no, because there's wonderful authors such as Brandon Sanderson and people like Patrick Rothfuss that will write like series. Except, they do put their time and effort. That's what they intended. They'd rather have it to be a long form story than just one book.
Right. It's not just a money-making machine.
Yeah, it's not a money making machine.
But yeah, I mean, like, also the sequel thing goes into, like, the movie sequel thing, which is like, oh, if you have a bunch of books, then you can make a bunch of movies about it, which is going off the Harry Potter model. And it is kind of funny that both Unfortunate Events and Percy Jackson kind of did that thing where they're like, oh, we could also have this whimsical, like, family film franchise based off of this children's series, and then people will come and watch it. And I think, what's the other one? Vampires?
The Vampire's Assistant.
Assistant, that's what it was.
And also there's the Spiderwick Chronicles. And there was supposed to be Aragon.
Yeah, there was. Didn't they make one Aragon movie? Or
Yeah, it flopped terribly. And they've been trying to make another one for a long time. But the person that owns the rights to Aragon, he'll sell the sequels, but not the original one.
that was like a super popular thing around that time, like early 2000s. Like, oh, this is such a cash cow. It's easy. Stupid children will go and watch anything. So it's like you see like these series start.
Well, I mean, to be fair, if you watch half the stuff that we watched as a kid, we would be like, what did we watch? Like, there was this. I used to watch like this Hot Wheels series, which if I told you the plot of it, sounded so insane. But it was
Like
called
the cars?
Hot Wheels Acceleracers. So there's these two teams of racers. One of them is like a bunch of like Tokyo Drift techno guys, and the other one are like these heavy metal maniac dudes, and they have to go to a different dimension to fight racing robots.
That sounds a little bit like the plot of that weird Chuck E. Cheese movie we watched.
Oh yeah, it is. That's what I was getting flashbacks for. So it's like. The weird thing about kids' media in general is it's either really sophisticated because it's not really written for kids. It's more written for like the adults reading to kids because there'll be messages, and then there's things that like are very insulting to kids.
They're like dumbed down. That's like a real pain. I really hate stuff like that where you watch something that's intended for kids and it's like you can tell that they're talking down to them in a way. I guess that's why I was so obsessed with Lemony Snicket when I was a kid, and also now to this day.
Yeah, no, we're the same way when it comes to that because, it didn't talk down to kids. Harry Potter didn't talk down to kids. Percy Jackson most definitely doesn't talk down to kids because that's kind of one of the themes of this.
Oh yeah, well the whole point is it's teaching you, so it's less. There's like a very fine line between children's literature where you're teaching but you're not like explaining in a way that presumes that you don't know that. I guess like the way that is worked into the plot, it isn't just being like, well, clearly you don't know what Medusa is or whatever, but just kind of weaving it into the plot where it teaches while also it's not like hitting you over the head with it where it's almost insulting to kids. Like, oh, I guess some kids would know who Medusa is or who Poseidon is.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also like one of those things where it's like the global zeitgeist of most people know what Medusa is. It's been in so much media.
Yeah, that's true too. Mostly they don't know it from like reading mythology books. They know it from watching Hercules or something.
Which I like. So I guess this is kind of like a little weird little rant, but what we're trying to say here is that I think with the Percy Jackson books, especially with this ending, is it is not. It slowly starts to become less of a kid's book and more of, again, that's where we use the term young adult because of the themes that they present also in this chapter. So what did you think of this chapter just in general?
It was interesting. I really liked actually the intro part where Percy explains more of like the mortal perception of like godlike goings on, I guess is how I would describe it.
Oh yeah, like how he stops becoming a fugitive. Like, according to the LA News, the explosion at Santa Monica Beach had been caused when a crazy kidnapper fired a shotgun at a police car. He accidentally hit a gas main and had ruptured with the earthquake. This crazy kidnapper, aka Ares, was the same man who had abducted me and my two other adolescent friends in New York City and brought us across country on a 10-day odyssey of terror.
Yeah, I really liked the quote in the beginning that just it's funny how humans can wrap their mind around things and fit them into their version of reality, because I think that sums up in general the justification for why humans aren't constantly noticing that there are magic things happening all around them. Is like there's something about the way mortal brains function where they have the ability to rationalize anything into something that makes more sense than some magical half-god kid went across the country to retrieve a bolt for Zeus. Like, all that stuff wouldn't be able to be comprehended by a human. We've talked about this before, but it's similar to kind of like the concept of like muggles and like using magic to erase their memory. But I almost like this justification better because it's not like you have to individually go back and sort of Men in Black erase people's memory. It's more like the natural way of humans is to ignore the reality of what's actually happening and to construct something that's easier to understand, which I think is kind of true, even though it's not necessarily true about like literal magic. It's kind of true about like the way people function is we tend to rationalize and see things as the way that we find the most comfortable, less challenging to our beliefs that are we already have that bias.
Yeah, no, especially like one thing that I like to stress with people when it comes to stuff is that usually eyewitness testimony is usually either wrong or incorrect in most ways. So that's kind of like one of the interesting things about human nature, which, you know, perfectly fits into the Percy Jackson mythos is, you know, you see one thing, but maybe you're seeing something completely different. And then someone will give you the most plausible story. And then your mind will automatically go to like, oh, obviously this person was robbing the bank. He wasn't stopping the robber and accidentally had the money in his hands.
We're really prone to suggestion as humans. That's why things like hypnotic regression kind of stuff could bring up memories that don't actually exist in people. It's why people can be like, oh yeah, that guy who did that thing, I definitely remember that happening. Like it's the Mandela effect. It's the way we misremember things. Like people construct memories every time they remember them.
I think one of my favorite little facts is that if you've ever had a dream or you're thinking of someone, chances are the reason you come up with their face is because humans can't actually come up with new faces. They actually take bits and pieces of people they've seen in random places and put them together to make a new face.
So your brain constructs realities all the time. I particularly like the part where Percy said that like people insisted that they had seen Ares other places where he hadn't been. Like, oh yeah, why didn't I notice him before? Why didn't I notice that guy in the motorcycle jacket with the kids when the bus exploded or whatever? Like all that stuff suddenly it connects the thread of the inconsistencies that they witnessed when Percy was going on the cross-country thing, and it like justified everything. So like, oh, that's the perfect solution. Of course, I saw that person who ended up being the person who kidnapped these children, and actually that whole big god fight that went down on the beach, he actually just shot a cop car and like accidentally, he hit like a gas main or something and caused an explosion?
He hit a gas main and it blew up because there was the earthquake. But there's also like things that were in this reality now. Percy Jackson's the hero, like on the bus, the reason why they fled was they were trying to escape the kidnapper. And obviously when they got to the arch, Ares was in that area of Colorado, so people had taken a picture of him because he had threatened that diner. As well as when it comes to small things, I think that's what's interesting about this is like the perception of reality and how in most situations it's like, how does one get exonerated from like almost mass terrorism on like this terror odyssey that they were talking about?
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because they immediately go from like pitchforks and torches, like thinking that Percy is this horrible delinquent child, like wreaking havoc across the country. And then all of a sudden they completely flip and go, oh, he's a hero. He was just kidnapped. Like the way that public opinion completely changes is really funny.
Yeah, which is really funny because it's like he goes from like this vile person, like I just imagine like the TMZ reports of like they put like devil horns and like a forked tongue to suddenly he's America's sweetheart who wants to be on American Idol.
Yeah, like now they're helping them get back to New York, like paying for their tickets. Like everyone feels so bad for them that there's basically like a GoFundMe, like, oh, let's raise funds for these children.
So the one thing that I thought was really funny about this is the turnaround time between them going from California to New York when the FBI should have been involved. Like they needed to like, hey kids, we need to get your testimonies. We need to like have reconstruct everything that happened. You're gonna have to be here for a couple of days. Not like, okay, 32 skidoo. We're gonna go to New York now.
Exactly. It's so funny, especially because literally a big chunk of this book is all about them getting from point A to point B across the country, and then them getting to New York actually is really fast. I mean, it's not perfect, and obviously Zeus isn't happy that they're taking the plane.
Well, what else are they supposed to do? Unless like they go get a rocket ship. I know a guy, and then they walk up to Elon Musk's house, and he like, here, take my space car.
My space car. I mean, either way, the space car would also be in. Well, I guess space is above Zeus's territory, right?
This is above the sky. I guess maybe like they would die from re-entry, but that would be about it.
So much happened in this chapter. It's like it's really funny almost. A bit of a like a weird humorous thing to have all this build up, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, you're exonerated, Percy, and you're gonna get on a flight and it's gonna be okay, and oh, by the way, you're gonna go and meet your dad and Zeus, and he's gonna tell you that your mom is also alive. Like it's like all these issues that were presented in the beginning of the book and were such big things are all of a sudden like really minimal and quickly tied up in a single chapter.
I think it also has to do with, I'm going to just go on Rick Riordan on the, his defense and probably say that he only had so many pages you could write in the book, so he had to edit it down.
I mean, I'm not criticizing it necessarily. Like, I did think that it was interesting and I was excited that these things were happening, but it just was like a little funny in contrast to like all the build up, I guess. Just them traveling to the underworld because he literally wanted to save his mom and all of that, and the Helm of Darkness and Hades not listening to him. Like, it was so difficult like a day ago, and all of a sudden a lot of these things kind of like literally Deus Ex Machina, like literally the gods swoop in and go, okay, well, here's your mom back, everything's fine.
Well, there's a reason for that. There's always going to be there's going to be a build up and a payoff. If we go back to, I guess once we get to Percy's dad, Hades is not like a malice person. He's not going to just murder. This is like a double, triple cross.
Right, that makes sense. I mean, that's the thing is like it has its internal consistency, so that's why it didn't bother me. It makes sense that Hades would go, oh, I guess I have my thing back. Well, here's your mom or whatever. Like, he's not that invested in keeping her around. But for whatever reason, because it was so built up and she was trapped in Hades for a long time, and we thought that she was basically going to be left to die because they didn't have a third pearl to help her escape and all that kind of stuff.
Well, also, you got to think of it this way, B. Percy failed in his mission. He couldn't retrieve her from the underworld. Hades gave her back to Percy. He's still technically... He never got her from the underworld. That wasn't his plan. He was going to, maybe later on in his life.
Yeah, I keep thinking about the Oracle, right? Because it said that he would fail to keep what matters most, or so. I forget exactly what the phrasing was, but...
You're going to fail to save what matters most in the end.
In the end. So, I don't know what that means. Is it very literal? Like, he didn't save her technically, but he did because he gave the Helm of Darkness back, and that's what let his mom go free. So is that like... Does that mean that something's going to happen to her still, or what matters most? There's like so many questions about the vague phrasing of the Oracle.
Well, we'll get into that more, but let's kind of like swing it back a little bit and get Percy to New York, which is, it goes to humidity to like right now it's 115 degrees out, so let's just assume Percy is that the plane pretty much is on fire as it comes into, is it JFK? So Percy and the gang land in New York. Actually, Percy tells Annabeth and Grover, go to Camp Half-Blood and tell good old Creon everything about all that's happening. I'm going to go confront Zeus and my dad, even though I don't know if I'll meet my dad.
Yeah.
And he goes and speeds off to the Empire State Building, which the next part made me scream. So Percy goes inside to the Empire State Building. He talks to the guy in the front desk, that's the guard, and he was reading a huge book with a picture of a wizard on it. I wasn't much into fantasy, but that book must have been good. It's Harry Potter. He's most likely reading Harry Potter.
The implication that it's Harry Potter. That went over my head. I just assumed that it was like, oh, it was like something magical, so that was like a hint that he was in on it. I didn't even think that it was necessarily Harry Potter, but I guess that makes sense.
It's Harry Potter. That's what other book would like Rick Riordan trying to be writing about?
He literally crossed off something on our bingo board.
Rick Riordan needs his bingo board. There, he's made a Harry Potter reference. I'm like, go to jail.
Yeah, I like how at first the guard kind of pretends that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh, well, Lord Zeus doesn't see anyone unannounced. I love that, like, then Percy just heaves out the master boat, like, hey, I got this thing.
And then he's like, oh, right this way. And they walk to one of the elevators.
I have a soft spot for a trope as stupid as that, where it's like someone doesn't listen to you, and then you're like, well, I do have this magical thing. I don't know if it makes any difference. And then all of a sudden the guard's like, oh, well, sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. Like that kind of all of a sudden like groveling because you have some sort of powerful object.
One of my other favorite versions of it is in The Jewel of the Nile with Michael Douglas, where the main heroine, she writes like romance novels, and they're in the middle of like the Amazon, and they have to get into this building to possibly get a boat or some way to get to the Jewel of the Nile, and this guy's not letting them in, and then she's like, Michael Douglas says her name, and all of a sudden the guy opens the door and he's like, I'm your biggest fan, I've read all your books. It's really funny.
When like the protagonist has the power to do the thing they need to do, because so often it's like this underdog story of like Percy not having the means to trick people into letting him do this weird oblique mission that a lot of people don't understand. So for him to like have the object that convinces them to let him in, like I really like that part.
Well, yeah, especially like right now, he goes up on the Empire State Building to the 600th floor, and they're playing I Believe I Can Fly. Which, when I think of that, I think of Fun with Dick and Jane.
I saw like a bad bootleg of that movie in like the early 2000s, and it wasn't good then, and I don't think it's good now.
The most famous part of that is Jim Carrey's going to be getting a promotion. He gets into the elevator and they're playing it, and he just starts like being Jim Carrey and starts singing I Believe I Can Fly.
Yeah, just being Jim Carrey, you know, doing that old chestnut.
So Percy gets up to the 600th floor, and they are now on Mount Olympus, which is a literal mountain in the sky.
Roads wound crazily up to the peak, where the largest palace gleamed against the snow. Precariously perched gardens bloomed with olive trees and rose bushes. I could make out an open-air market filled with colorful tents, a stone amphitheater built on one side of the mountain, a hippodrome and Colosseum on the other. It was an ancient Greek city, except it wasn't in ruins. It was new and clean and colorful, the way Athens must have looked 2,500 years ago.
See, that's such a beautiful description of, like, you would imagine where the gods would live, would be this beautiful place that is Mount Olympus.
Our idea of Greece is, like, or ancient Greece is a little bit whitewashed in the sense that you imagine it like this pristine, very noble place, but it actually used to be a lot more colorful than people imagine, right? Like all those Greek and Roman statues that you see in museums were actually like painted before they all faded to white. So I like the description that it was this sort of colorful city on this hill.
Well, that would make sense, especially like when it comes to like Greek and Rome I don't think of, when I think of that, you think of a kind of like desert environment with like everything in ruins, but everything was lush and green because, you know, they're pretty much on an island.
Yeah, it's really cool to like imagine when those ancient things were actually being used and lived in. And
well, yeah, I could just like talk, like gush about everything all the Greeks did, and especially what the Romans did, you know, still stand today, which, you know, say that about like, if you walk down the street right now, how many new buildings and stuff are replacing old buildings?
I mean, a building collapsed right behind my apartment, so really, we're not doing such a great job.
No, and a lot of like our statues and monuments might not even last because they were built cheap.
Yeah, things are built to last, but well, because that also I think comes from a specific Greek sense of like eternal remembrance of who you are and like your legacy and that kind of thing.
Simba, remember who you are. Thanks, Star Dad.
Not quite. I think it's more like, remember who I am because I was great and awesome. Here's a statue of my face. People were way more like that back then.
I really like all the descriptions, especially like when you walk through this, they see other gods such as like the muses, as well as like people selling things like hawking their wares, almost like Info Channel, like the knife show.
Yeah.
this is what you would have. Also, this is kind of like the interesting thing about. We're not going to go more into religion, but it's like when you think of heaven, you think of something similar to this, where it's in the clouds, it's very shiny and bright, everything's made out of gold.
Yeah, like a beautiful city in the mountains surrounded by clouds with gods.
So they walk into the main place where the gods, do their council, and it is the biggest, most beautiful place you could possibly think of. Think of the Grand Central Station, but like a billion.
Well, Grand Central Station isn't that impressive.
No, probably not.
It's kind of gross sometimes.
But when you think of like the old version of it before it became super gross and dirty, that's what you probably would think about.
Yeah, it's usually just like it's the litter and stuff. It's okay. Sometimes when I see just a bunch of tourists there, I'm like, oh, I hate this place.
So they get inside and there's only two people sitting on the main chairs, except there's one thing that Percy has an epiphany about, and that is Mount Olympus is an exact replica of the one in the underground for the underworld because Hades isn't allowed up there. So he made his own OC version of it.
Which is kind of sad in a way.
And this goes back to the thing of Hades did nothing wrong, and he is a lovely boy that should get love and respect.
Yeah. I realized Hades must have built his palace to resemble this one. He wasn't welcomed in Olympus except on the winter solstice, so he'd built his own Olympus underground. Despite my bad experience with him, I felt a little sorry for the guy. To be banished from this place seemed really unfair. It would make anybody bitter.
So Percy gets up to the podium pretty much, and in front of him are people that are like 12 feet tall, and both of them kind of like represent and look the way that of their domain.
Yeah, I like their different outfits.
Here, do you want me to read Zeus and you want to read Poseidon's?
Yeah.
So Zeus, Lord of the Gods, wore a dark blue pinstripe suit. He sat on a simple throne of solid platinum. I like how it's a simple throne, but made out of platinum.
Yeah, right. Just of solid platinum, just a humble, solid platinum throne.
He had a well-trimmed beard, marble gray and black like a storm of clouds. His face was proud and handsome and grim. His eyes were rainy gray. And I like how as Percy gets closer to him, he smelled the air crackled and smelled like ozone. Like, what? What does ozone smell like?
Ozone smells like a storm, so like fresh air, basically. Sawbones just had an episode about ozone, so they talked about this, how like people thought that ozone was like a medical thing because it smelled clean. It's because it's basically O3, so they're like, oh, it's extra oxygen. It's not, spoiler alert. But it's like that after storm kind of fresh smelling feel. Not just the like the petrichor smell of the trees and stuff, but that like very clean feeling of a storm.
I guess because it's being ionized a little bit through storms and stuff.
It's being ozonated is what's happening. Yeah, I don't know. Listen to that episode for an explanation on ozone.
And then sitting right next to Poseidon is someone that kind of looks like a buff Jimmy Buffett almost.
Yeah, that's what I was like. This guy sounds like a Jimmy Buffett kind of dude. This guy's on island time.
He's like his favorite restaurant is Margaritaville, no matter where he goes.
Yeah, exactly. Oh God, I hate Margaritaville so much. I'll tell you the story about Margaritaville after I read this description. The god sitting next to him was his brother. Without a doubt, he was dressed very differently. He reminded me of a beachcomber from Key West. He wore leather sandals, khaki Bermuda shorts, and a Tommy Bahama shirt with coconuts and parrots all over it. His skin was deeply tanned, his hands scarred like an old-time fisherman's. His hair was black like mine, his face that same brooding look that had always gotten me branded a rebel, but his eyes, sea green like mine, were surrounded by sun crinkles that told me he smiled a lot too.
See, I like that description of him just because he's kind of like the old man of the ocean.
Yeah, it's really funny that he's in such casual wear. Like, I thought that was hilarious. It kind of makes sense to, imagine a god in a suit, but there's just something really funny about this guy dressed in like a Hawaiian shirt.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with I actually like Hawaiian shirts a little bit, but like only when I'm on vacation. Otherwise, it gets a little creepy.
Yeah. One time I was on the train and I saw a man in a Hawaiian shirt and he was very excitedly talking to another man about a store online where you can buy more Hawaiian shirts.
Hawaiian shirts, like they have an aesthetic, but also it's kind of like if you just wear them all the time, you get annoying very quickly.
Yeah, well, you're like the cartoon idea of a tourist with like a camera around your neck and all that, and like the bad tan lines and sunglasses.
Yeah, so now you have to tell me the story about Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville. We're not sponsored by Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville, but if Jimmy Buffett wants to sponsor us with his Margaritaville.
Oh, they're not going to give us a sponsorship now because I'm going to tell you how much I hated it there. It was terrible. My parents took us to Jamaica when we were kids, which, first of all, I'm very pale, and I put on a lot of sunscreen, but there was only so much I could do, and I came home and all of my skin fell off like I was a snake, so that was a really bad time for everybody involved.
Well, I think when we thought of like your skin falling off, like you actually like take off your skin and you're like a skeleton, let me slip into something more comfortable.
Yeah, like I'm a lizard under. Yeah, exactly. No, I just like an entire surface layer of my skin fell off. It was horrible. It was a bad time.
And for the people that are eating at home, I apologize.
Yeah, sorry. It was a distressing time. If you are visiting somewhere close to the equator, wear more sunscreen than you think you need. Because I applied it like every hour probably more than that, and still, it didn't work out for my pale body. Anyway, that wasn't even the issue. The issue was Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville. I can't speak to every location, but this location in Jamaica, it sucked. It was loud. We were sitting there. The tables were on the beach, which was kind of cool. But there was this woman who had this like loudspeaker. This what is it? The word that I'm thinking of? Megaphone. She had a megaphone, and she was just sort of like yelling excitedly about everyone dancing. There was like blaring Jimmy Buffett music, just blare, like the loud, I could still hear it in my head after we left, just the loudest possible Jimmy Buffett music you could ever imagine. And it was basically maybe the same few songs over and over again. And then people were just playing. They were limboing underneath a bamboo stick, and the woman was screaming. And I had just some like subpar coconut shrimp. It wasn't a great time. It was like a very loud outdoor Applebee's. It wasn't a good experience for anybody.
Now, we just want to personally thank our sponsors, Jimmy Buffett.
Yeah, just Jimmy Buffett personally is sponsoring us. Just the man himself.
Dude, that guy can like double fist 2 margaritas while pterodactyls are coming after him. That man is a national hero. So they get there, and automatically Zeus is like, "Oh, I think we should just kill him, because no matter what Percy does, he's wrong."
Yeah, right? Like, way to go, Zeus. He's just like, all right, well, child murder should happen. And he gets like jealous too, which is so rude. He's like, "Oh, you talked to your dad first?" It's like, yeah, it's his god dad. Can you give him a second? Like,
he's never even met his god dad before. But it's like, it's such a weird like interaction, especially like how Zeus kind of fits his personification of being like very temperamental, like almost like lightning. Like he comes down hard and leaves with a boom. Even though Percy presents him the Master Bolt, all Zeus does is literally insult Percy Jackson the entire time. And how, even though, I guess the whole point of this is Zeus doesn't want to say sorry because, you know, he was wrong. And that's kind of like something that Zeus doesn't do.
You still claim him then? Zeus asked menacingly. And then Poseidon says, "I have admitted my wrongdoing," which is, it's kind of a mean thing to say to your kid. Even if it's like about this weird oath thing that you made as a god, it's still not the nicest thing to call your child a wrongdoing.
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, it is like an awful thing to say, just about saying, "Whoops, my little mistake is here. Come along, little mistake."
Yeah, it's terrible. It's so mean.
Like, I don't think even as a kid you want to be called a mistake. Just a heads up there, old Poseidon boy.
Yeah, the description of Poseidon is interesting because it said, "I wasn't sure what I saw in his face. There was no clear sign of love or approval, nothing to encourage me. It was like looking at the ocean. Some days you could tell what mood it was in. Most days, though, it was unreadable, mysterious." So there's sort of like this sense that he does defend Percy to some extent to Zeus, but he's like this neutral being. He's not particularly father-like in the sense that he's not like, "Oh, you're my son," and runs up to him or anything like that.
I think we're thinking of this in like mortal thoughts. When you think of this in immortal, like, I have to think of it as how many kids Zeus and Poseidon had in their entire life. Probably thousands, maybe even millions, who knows.
Yeah,
but it's like you see them all like wither and die.
Percy actually doesn't mind the weird vibes he's getting from Poseidon, because he says, in a strange way, I was glad that Poseidon was so distant. If he tried to apologize or told me he loved me or even smiled, it would have felt fake, which is fair because he'd never met this dude and he did abandon him. And there's kind of this weird rift where yes, it is technically his dad, but he didn't raise him or know him, so it'd be strange for all of a sudden for him to act father-like.
I mean, there's also like the thing about it is like I know people that have never really met their dads, and they have people that are like their stepfathers or like people like older brothers that they've considered more like their dads than their actual dads, and they've actually met them. And it's like such a weird thing because it's like the interesting thing about having like mothers and fathers, or mothers and mothers, or fathers and fathers, is sometimes you don't have to be blood to have a relationship with someone that you would consider your father figure, which Percy doesn't consider Poseidon really a father figure. I don't even know what Percy believes in when it comes to that, but he grew up by himself.
Yeah, I mean, Percy doesn't really have a father figure because Smelly Gabe is just this guy who he hates. And then, I mean, as far as like male role models, he has.
If you would consider it, would be more like he's more like he loves his mother more. Like he considers his mom to be one of the strongest people.
Yeah, he has Chiron as like a male role model, and obviously has his mom, who he looks up to as sort of the person who was there to raise him. It's like a complicated, kind of sad situation.
Because unfortunately, Poseidon's more of like a deadbeat dad, almost. Like,
yeah,
no matter what they did, Poseidon would never come back. It's like, this is going to sound really weird, but this reminds me of a song which they actually used in Guardians of the Galaxy, but I liked it before Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Do you know the song Brandy by Looking Glass?
I don't think so.
The whole song is basically about this woman that works at a bar near the sea, and everyone keeps like saying like, "Oh man, you'd be an amazing wife. You do all those wonderful things." But she loves one man who was a sailor, and he left because the sea was his true love, not her. Almost like the weird situation here. It's just like some people they love this one thing, which is their entire being, which is the sea. So that's Poseidon. Like he doesn't love, and he does love people, but not as much as he loves his domain rather than mortals.
I guess he's not, because he's not a person. He can't express love or empathy in the same way, I imagine.
Which is weird because Sally Jackson later on in this chapter says like he was going to build me a castle underneath the ocean.
Yeah, so I don't know how much he actually meant that.
Well, I mean, there's also like the idea of like sweet nuts. The problem though is like when we talk about like gods and like immortal people, that's why I don't want to be immortal, or people should never be.
Yeah, it would not be fun to be immortal.
No, and it's kind of like one of those things. It's like we could talk about this, but if you really think about it, time is the real enemy here. Get it? Time? Ha ha ha.
Oh god, yeah. Speaking of which, Percy, I almost, instead of Percy, said Zack, and that would have been funny. Zack was not there. Percy was there.
We're just actually chilling in the back.
You're just kind of witnessing the whole thing.
I gave out my true identity. Oops.
Whoops. Yeah, Percy appears before them and is like, hey, I got the Master Bolt in case you want it. And then he has to explain what's actually going on.
Yeah, and it's kind of like they first assume again that it's Hades, because that's the first person you would assume. But then Percy's like, I went to Hades and I had a completely different vibe compared to this. But I had the same vibe when I went to Tartarus.
Yeah, so he talks about Tartarus and how something evil's going on there. Poseidon and Zeus are a little bit wary about what he's talking about. They say they had a quick, intense discussion in ancient Greek, yeah.
And all that Percy can make out is the one word, father.
So their father, basically the creators of the current pantheon of gods, is Kronos.
God of time.
Yeah. And also God of being a jerk.
I told you, I was surprised you didn't get that little thing in the beginning. Like they brought up Kronos a couple times in the first 2 chapters.
I guess it just like went over my head. I didn't really think that it was...
I thought what was going to give it away was that when Creon was talking to Percy about the Titans and saying, oh, they don't truly go away. No one truly goes away.
Yeah.
Like, oh, there you go.
I guess I wasn't thinking of it that way. It kind of just went over my head. Also, it's like, I think early in the book when I was still like adjusting to the way the universe worked and all the different characters and was anxious to see what was going to happen, I wasn't actually looking for the hints that I should have been looking for. But yeah, that was a piece of foreshadowing that I totally missed.
Which, I mean, I guess that's a good version of a book because, again, like Rick Riordan wrote a bunch of mysteries before he wrote Percy Jackson, and that was like a good mystery writer will put those little nuggets of foreshadowing but aren't like overtly noticeable.
Yeah. It's hard to contextualize that kind of thing too when you are reading so spaced out. I think maybe if I read it all within a couple days or a day, that if I read that thing about Kronos and then, I moved further along in the book and had to conceptualize of like, oh, okay, who stole the Master Bolt, who is like pulling the string, so to speak, behind the scenes, then that may have become more clear if I wasn't like separating out each discrete chapter as much as I did in this particular reading, but I guess there's no way to know.
Maybe it's one of those things where even when I read it for the first time, I didn't know about it. And I used to read a lot of mystery books. Because it's kind of like one of those offhanded things because you imagine because the series is called Percy Jackson and the Olympians, you're automatically going to think that the villain is an Olympian, like Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, and all those. Because the first thing that you're led to believe through the entire time is that Hades is the main villain because obviously he's the Lord of the Dead. Like, obviously that'd be the first conclusion.
Right, yeah, he's used as a scapegoat both by the gods and then to some extent, like, in our popular culture and stuff. Like, oh, of course, he's the villain. He's the guy who does all the evil stuff. But there's also just, in general, like, you don't really think about the deep lore that they provide you about Kronos creating the other gods and all of that. Like, you don't necessarily immediately jump to, oh, well, clearly he's still around, like, trying to pull the strings, trying to get the gods to fight each other. Like, it's hard to contextualize all that stuff.
Well, especially when it comes to with Kronos and having, like, you would automatically don't think of the Titans. They're kind of like, the interesting thing is they're forgotten. Everyone always knows what the gods are, but they don't know about the Titans and the things that came before them, the elementals.
The things that came before, exactly.
Which they're in Hercules, but the whole thing of them is like they're these gigantic brooding forces.
Oh, right. I forgot that was in Hercules.
Guys, Olympus is that way.
So he blames Kronos, and he's not really listened to by Poseidon and Zeus.
Yeah, because Zeus gives him his reward. He gets to live. And then Zeus does the most extra thing and explodes into, like, light and disappears. And then Poseidon's like, Zeus could have been the god of theater. He's so dramatic.
Yeah, he's like so dramatique. It's especially funny how he basically just is like, all right, well, I got what I got. He's sort of like that, what is that from, I want to say Sailor Moon, like the reaction of like, well, I'm done here. It's like, you didn't do anything.
Exactly.
My work here is done. That's basically what Zeus does. He just kind of causes a tantrum and then gets his thing back and doesn't care.
Oh, yeah, no, he doesn't even start tantruming as well. I'm going to go, like, wash my bolt off because you touched it with your mortal hands.
His tantrum was blaming Percy and blaming Hades and basically blaming everyone but himself for being oblivious. But
I mean, that's kind of like the theme of Percy Jackson a little bit here, is Percy Jackson is like the perfect version of he does something and then something bad happens and everyone blames him, and then there should just be like a slide whistle.
Yeah, there's a lot of blaming of the wrong people in this book. It's pretty frustrating. No one's listening to Percy. Even Poseidon says, from time to time over the eons, Kronos has stirred. He enters men's nightmares and breathes evil thoughts. He wakens restless monsters from the depths, but to suggest he could rise from the pit is another thing. So he's skeptical of the idea that Kronos could have the power to be manipulating this whole thing.
That, and especially Zeus has closed the case, so they're not going to talk about it ever again.
Yeah, it's basically him standing there with a big mission accomplished banner. Like, nothing actually happened, but whatever.
It's like Poseidon just gives Percy a gigantic golden sticker. You did good.
Like, here you go, whatever. Yeah, he's like, oh, well, you did an okay job, I guess. I'm proud of you, but I'm not going to really listen to you.
And, this is kind of like, I would consider some of the sad parts about this is because then Poseidon starts talking to Percy about, it's like, hey, not that I love you, but I'm so sorry that I brought you into this world because now you have to have the hero's fate. Like, if I could do it all over again, I wish you weren't born. Wah, 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 wah.
Yeah, which is kind of a sad thing to say to someone. Again, my dude, not the best dad.
There's two ways of thinking of this if I was to play devil's advocate. The first is Percy is now doomed to a life because he's technically accomplished his mission, where his entire life is now going to be fighting, and I'm sure a demigod's life expectancy isn't that high. unless he just stays at Camp Half-Blood for the rest of his life. Like, he's going to be like
I mean, he makes a good point, right? Like, the hero's fate is always tragic to some extent because he has to go out and fight these demons and be the hero to everyone and go out on quests, and that the entire point of that is you're probably going to die in battle. Like, that's the great reward you're expecting.
Yeah, and then there's, like, the idea of just, like, Percy having, like, a nice, happy life. Like, it would have been easier if he wasn't born, though I think it's kind of like those weird, like, slippery slopes. It's like, how dare you say that to a kid? We're thinking of this, again, as, in terms of, it's in different context. Like, he probably didn't think it was, like, an insulting thing, but to most kids, that would be devastating.
At least he clarifies a little bit when he says, do not misunderstand me. Whatever else you do, know that you are mine. You are a true son of the sea god. So he
basically, in his own words, said, I'm proud of you, son.
He made him proud, even though that Poseidon, in his heart of hearts, feels a little bit guilty for condemning Percy to be fighting monsters, basically, for his whole life, because that's kind of the deal.
So that's kind of like one of those arguments, though, is Poseidon a good dad or a bad dad?
He's not the best dad, I'll tell you that much. But also, yeah, like, he's not a dad, though. He's this other dude. He's a deadbeat dad. He's more of a bad dad than he is a good one. I would say that. He doesn't...
I kind of consider him like... You don't call him dad, you call him Poseidon. Like, hey, Mom, are you going to be with Poseidon today?
Exactly, yeah.
He's not like on a first dad name basis. You wouldn't call him dad first. You would call him by his first name. Hey, is Chad going to be there today? Hey, this is my mom, and this is her boyfriend, Chad.
He doesn't fulfill the human familial responsibilities of being a dad, so he's bad in that way. And also, even just the way that he talks to Percy isn't super warm or inviting, and I get that Percy kind of feels relieved by that, but just in general, yeah, they just operate on a different level. They don't have the same sense of empathy or knowing that it would be weird and rude to have a kid and then to leave them and to never talk to them, but still, because of being born from you, he has this, like, incredibly intense fate of being a hero. Like, that's a lot to put on a kid. Like, yes, Poseidon feels guilty, but I think maybe the kinder thing would be to say, I wish I was there to support you, not I wish you weren't born. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with what you're saying. It's like one of those things about, you doom a person to his fate, and I wish, I kind of, like, in his own way, he's kind of apologizing, but also in the same way, I don't know. The problem with Poseidon is that he
wishes that Percy as a situation didn't exist, which is a rude thing to say, to be like, oh, I wish the problem of your life didn't exist, when he did create that problem. And it is a little bit almost rude to, like, put that on that kid, because then he's put in the position of comforting his own dad about him being born. It's like a very weird thing to put on a child. Like, it makes so much more sense to say, oh, I'm sorry that you have to deal with this and that I wasn't there or whatever. Like, he seems to not even have the sense to say that was the thing that made it difficult for Percy.
Much like Zeus, probably Poseidon has a bias when it comes to this stuff. Like, he's also, because he's a god, he has to still be proud. Like, would a god ever apologize to a mere mortal about being wrong? Probably not.
No, probably not. Yes, I understand that. And that's another frustrating thing.
And it's like one of those things, it's like having, like, your precious cinnamon. It's like, that's not how the story goes. Poseidon's not going to be like, I love you, son. Let's play catch. It's never going to happen. They're never
I mean, I wouldn't even imagine that. But yeah, it's like that scene in, what is it, Toy Story 2?
Toy Story 2, I'm going to play catch with my dad.
Buzz Lightyear play catch. Yeah, it's not going to be like that. But even if there was a scene where he acknowledges the difference between who gods are and who humans are, and that he doesn't understand how to fulfill the role of a human dad, but that he's sorry that he was deprived that role in his life, because I don't think that I don't even think that Poseidon realizes that is such a big aspect of why Percy has such a complicated, strained relationship. It's not just that he condemned him to be a hero and to do all this stuff and fight monsters. He also condemned him to be living with his mom in, like, a nightmarish apartment with this, like, terrible, smelly gay boyfriend who, like, abuses her. Like, it's a bad situation.
Yeah, there's, like, no sunshine and rainbows. I think that's kind of like one of the images of when I think of Percy Jackson is everyone always perceives both Percy Jackson and Harry Potter as, like, this nice little romp through the magical world. But if you break down both Percy Jackson and Harry Potter, what in your words, if you can say Percy Jackson or actually even Harry Potter in one sentence, what would it be?
I mean, both of them are traumatized magical boy, learns of magic, escapes abusive life.
Yeah, it's exactly. Harry Potter, wizard boy that's been abused and escapes. That's a sentence. Percy Jackson, magical boy who finds out that his dad's a deadbeat, has magical powers, and escapes to a much
Yeah,
better
and then
life.
Camp Half-Blood and Hogwarts serve a similar purpose of like this, like increased magical responsibility kind of stuff and a whole different level of issues involving that, but at least like the freedom from the mortal world that was damaging to them.
Hey, we tried really hard not to talk about Harry Potter, but
Yeah,
it's
but they're like the parallels are really strong there.
even in Harry Potter, Dumbledore is not a good person. I'm so sorry if you believe he's a good person. I don't believe he's a
Not
good. I
great.
don't even think he's a decent person because
He's very
like
similar to Poseidon in this scenario.
the difference though. I guess between them is that I consider Dumbledore does have emotions and he kind of loves Harry in some sense of just
Right. He's not as like completely removed.
I'm a your father like ish figure and I
Yeah,
kind of
he's a weird guy. There's a lot of complicated weird father figures in children's books.
So the one thing that I have to think about every time this happens is you have to always think about the author. Maybe they didn't have a good relationship with their dad, or there's like many different things, and that's kind of like them as a person. I don't kind of believe in the, I don't write from my experiences and like I try to stay completely different, but it's like when you write a book for so
It
long.
always inform. Well, I mean, yeah, that's like when you read Roald Dahl and you know that there's a reason why he focused on the casual cruelty of adults. Like there's a reason he wrote about that.
Yeah, there's a reason. Like, there's like authors that say, I don't try to write about my own personal experiences, and it's like I don't believe that because when you're in the writing process, it is such a lonely, it is a job.
I mean, so many children's books are about children's abuse, really. I mean, Harry Potter is a big one. Like the Dursleys are abusive. Same thing with Gabe. Of course, Unfortunate Events too is like turns that on its head where not only are they suddenly taken on by like this terrible guardian who mistreats them, but no one comes to save them. A magical giant on like a motorcycle doesn't come and swoop them up and say, hey, you're safe now. Well, actually, you have this other responsibility. Instead, it's like, oh, you have this other weird responsibility because of who your parents are. And also the abusive people are still going to be there pursuing you. So you have like double this stuff to deal with.
Especially when it comes to with J.K. Rowling. Gotta think about when the time she was writing those books, she was deathly poor. Like she was stealing like diapers out of garbage cans. And like the idea for Hagrid, I think, is one of the most interesting stories. She was in a bar down on her luck, and she met a Hell's Angel. And if you don't know what a Hell's Angel is, they're like the scariest, most. They will murder you.
Well, they're basically Aries, right? In this book.
Yeah. So the funny thing about Hagrid is that he's inspired by this Hell's Angel, who is this big, intimidating guy. And he sits down right next to Joan, and he just starts talking about his flower garden. But yeah, it's like stuff like that. Like there's things like I can imagine if you talk to Rick Riordan, but you really asked him like the hard hitting questions, I'm sure he'd probably bring up some things both in his life.
Yeah, or maybe someone he knew. Maybe it's just like an important thing, but I do think there's like a through line.
Well, I mean, we know what the reason why he wrote the stories. It's kind of like also like the weird thing. He wrote this for his son. So what does that say about like Rick Riordan in a sense? Like, is this kind of like an apology? Like, I wish I was there for you more?
Or is it saying like, oh, I want to be a good dad? There's like a whole thing of like, okay, death of the author, but then also you could be like, okay, well, what are you trying to say? I don't want to read too much into it.
Yeah, because it's like we know like the reason why he wrote the story, but it's like then there's these themes. They're like almost like counterintuitive a little bit. Like,
I mean, it could just be like, oh, I know what a bad dad looks like, so I don't want to be that kind of person. I think I can imagine once you have a kid, there's this really great sense of responsibility where it's like, oh, I hope I don't mess this one up. So it could be like more of a sense of like, oh, okay, I know that things can go terribly wrong and it is a great responsibility to have a kid and I understand that responsibility, and like that's kind of what it's conveying.
But then you also have the Harry Potter argument, which I can put into Percy Jackson and say, hey, what if Harry Potter got to live with wizards most all of his life before he went to Hogwarts? Dumbledore was actually, I consider, correct in this part in just like leaving him out into a neutral party, even if it was a bad party, because he would turn out completely different. Same as with Percy. Like, unfortunately, if he lived in Mount Olympus and stuff, he'd have a different perception.
Oh, do you think they would have been more like full of themselves and like not because they weren't? I mean, but they are, right? There is a part where they're just like, oh, I am the chosen one in Harry Potter.
Well, yeah, but that's much later on, after many years. Like when they have like the first part of denial, and they accept it, and then afterwards they kind of get sick of it.
So you think like coming from like lowly beginnings makes them a better hero?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's the hero's journey a little bit. Like if you have like with like Luke Skywalker, if he was automatically with his dad, Lord Vader, he'd be a completely different person. But because he was set into like a awful environment, it's kind of like those humble. It's one of those weird things. And you know what? I'm just gonna say, Poseidon's not a good dad. And for the people like I really wish Poseidon was a good dad. I'm so sorry. These are our opinions. He is not. This is not how the story goes. We're never gonna see Poseidon like hugging it out with Percy on like Jerry Springer and telling him he was an awful human being.
Well, because he's not a dad, right? That's like a whole other separate thing. He's a god. There's a whole thing. Maybe doesn't understand how humans work. Whatever. It's hard to really say, but like judging him just as a human, if he were a human, he'd be a bad human.
And you know what, B? It's gonna keep going on. That's not even a spoiler. This is going to be a main theme throughout this whole series.
Yeah, I imagine so. And I do think, I mean, we get more into that after Percy leaves Olympus because he discovers that his mom is still alive. That's a real bomb to drop, isn't it? Like, hey, BT dubs, remember your mom?
You thought she was dead, right? Well, she's dead, tired. She's right home, sleeping it off.
Yeah, can you imagine coming back from that?
It's almost like the Wizard of Oz and how it's like, no matter what you do, you'll still go home because we had the power all along.
Yeah, I guess. Oh, yeah, it's like click your heels together kind of thing.
That must be like a real bombshell of an announcement that, the person you were fighting for now is alive again and just waiting for you because Hades, I will give him, he is a man of his honor. He did give Percy back what he wanted.
I was happy about that because that would have been really dumb if he just kept her there for no reason.
So Percy runs all the way through New York.
Yep.
And he gets home, and guess who's there?
Smelly Gabe.
Oh, who else would it be there?
He's disgusting. I love the description. It said, in the month I'd been gone, the apartment had turned into Gabe land. Garbage was ankle deep on the carpet. The sofa had been reupholstered in beer cans. Dirty socks and underwear hung off the lampshades. Ugh.
It just sounds like a train wreck on a train fire.
Yeah, disgusting. He's a gross guy. I mean, he's known as Smelly Gabe for a reason. I hate how rude he is immediately. He's like, yeah, when Gabe saw me, his cigar dropped out of his mouth. His face got redder than lava. You got nerve coming here, you little punk. I thought the police, like, hello, everyone in the world knows that Percy's not a fugitive anymore, so you're just being a jerk. This is pretty sad. Because this is like when it gets into like the kind of dark way in which Gabe treats his mom.
Yeah, and no, see, this is like the part where it's like, this is the left turn, and I totally forgot it was this chapter. But you know what? I think this chapter might be the best because you know what? It does get pretty dark, but also it's like, this is how abuse is.
Yeah.
Like, if I wanted to give a kid that didn't understand like what like spousal abuse is, I would just give him this book and tell him to read it, and then when you get to this chapter,
the way that they portray him, he's like a little bit cartoony in the beginning, right? Like and then all of a sudden you're like, oh right, he's not just like gross and mean and like. To be fair, he's emotionally manipulative, definitely in the beginning.
Well, he gaslights, obviously.
Yeah, he gaslights her and kind of like lies about different things to like get the mom to go to work.
But it's like, okay, so this is, I think what I was thinking about while I was reading this is Percy tries to kill Gabe with Riptide, but it's like it won't work because he's not even though he's a real monster, he's not a true monster, if that makes any sense.
He's not a magic monster that can be killed, so he's immortal, so he can't. Not immortal, immortal.
Yeah, and you know what? It'd suck if he was immortal.
Yeah.
Because what if he was Ares? That would be so gross.
Yeah, well, he's not even strong or, like, focused enough to be Ares. Because he's just, like, this schlub.
No, this is, like, the sad thing of, like, he takes her to the room, explains everything, and, Gabe is just this terrible person who's just, like, making orders, and then, like, he, like, raises his hand up to Percy's mom, and she starts flinching, where Percy realizes after all these years that Gabe has been hitting her. Like, this is not a first time thing.
Yeah, it just, as like through the eyes of a child, he didn't really understand what was going on, and now it's like all contextualized, and he's also just gone through this like very complicated hero's journey of learning to use his powers and use Riptide and all of that. So it's now he's like back in this.
He's gone from being super powerful to being weak. It's like it's the equivalent of like Gabe's friend holding like Percy's arms behind him as he's watching this a terrible thing. Percy's completely powerless. Even though he has all these powers now, they only work for mythical creatures, not reality itself, which is harsh.
Yeah, which is terrible because he feels like this sense of strength where he now wants to fight Gabe, but he can't.
Which is really messed up. But you know what? I kind of like the idea after this when they go, Percy and Percy's mom go into the room and they see the box.
Poseidon mentions that before Percy leaves Olympus and says that he has a decision to make when he gets home. And Percy didn't really understand until he gets home and realizes, oh, this is the box I sent myself. Or I guess he sent Olympus, and then Olympus forwarded it to him.
Return to sender. That dress unknown.
So he gets the box, and if you remember, way back in one of the earliest chapters, when Percy first started his journey, and they encountered Medusa, he cut off Medusa's head and put it in a box, and as like a gesture, mailed it to Olympus.
It wasn't a heart-shaped box, was it?
No. It was a snake-shaped box.
I like how they wanted to describe the box. It was a box big enough to fit a basketball. Like, yeah, okay. But I think it's like that powerful thing about how it's like Percy, again, it's like the fates pulling the strings. If Percy didn't, wasn't that weird, arrogant kid when he started this thing, he wouldn't have sent the box with Medusa's head. Thus, he actually created his own choice. Because his first choice was to, spite the gods by sending them this, and now all of a sudden the gods are giving him this gift that he thought that he was spiting them with, which also works because in Clash of Titans, Perseus, his main weapon, is Medusa's head at the end, which solves the main issue of fighting the Kraken.
Right, so now this is his weapon, again, that he can use against Gabe, or more like he pleads with his mom to use against Gabe.
Yeah, who in the equivalent of the story would be the Kraken.
This is just a kind of a sad ending to this chapter. Like, it is interesting that finally he's like confronting these other aspects of his life, but it's sad to like deal with the whole Gabe thing because it's less like fun and magical. Like, oh, we're fighting Medusa, we're fighting whatever, like creatures and characters along the way. It's like a literal abusive human. It's somehow more upsetting, even though it's less violent.
He has to make this choice, and the way he does it is, I wouldn't consider, I don't know if this is the most horrific thing, but asking his mom if she wants to murder Gabe.
Yeah, that's like a pretty dark
question.
Like,
you just want him gone?
Yeah.
It's like just think of it, okay, so you have to think of it as like, it is a kid asking, hey mom, we have this way to physically kill this person in the most horrific way possible. Do you want him gone?
Which is, gone is a loaded phrase.
And she doesn't even hesitate.
Yeah.
It's like, might as well throw mama off the train.
Yeah, I mean, she says that it's not that simple, but then he kind of pleads like, okay, we'll be honest. And then she says, yes, Percy, I do. I'm trying to get up my courage to tell him, but you can't do this for me. You can't solve my problems. I looked at the box. I could solve her problems. I wanted to slice that package open, plop it in on the poker table, and take out what was inside. I could start my very own statue garden right there in the living room.
And it's kind of like those things, it's like this weird monstrous act that's kind of like the weird neutral party where Percy Jackson can be both good and bad. It's like the weird like chaotic good or chaotic neutral.
Yeah, and the quote continues, that's what a Greek hero would do in the stories, I thought. That's what Gabe deserves. But a hero's story always ended in tragedy. Poseidon had told me that. It's like some dark stuff. Some very heavy stuff that he's reckoning with.
And to most kids, they goes right over their head. Like, this is murder. This is like... Remember when I talked about... I think it was like a chapter ago, if you had Percy Jackson killing a person, there's no turning back. Once you kill a person...
So far, he's only killed monsters that don't actually die, right? They just respawn. Yeah, you kill a person. They're gone forever.
There's no coming back from that, especially like, you'll be a changed person. Except, he doesn't make this decision. He leaves the box there and goes back to Camp Half-Blood. Because even Percy's mom decides, you cannot make this choice for me. If I'm going to do this, it has to be by myself, which I think is a very powerful message because it's kind of like if you're in an abusive situation, it's only you that can make the choice of leaving because if not, you might regret it for the rest of your life if you just, it's kind of like those.
Well, also she has this sense of responsibility that she wants to deal with things on her own. Like she wants to be the one who leaves Gabe. She doesn't want people solving her problems.
Yeah, no, that's kind of the thing. It's like if you have someone fighting your own battles, it's like she would be haunted for the rest of her life.
Which is also the reason she provides for why she stayed with Gabe and why she just didn't like live in the ocean with Poseidon.
And you know what? I think that's a very powerful message. I consider Percy's mom to be one of the best written mom characters ever in a kid's book.
Yeah, she's really, she's like complicated and interesting, and I think a lot of her character has to do with her wanting to take things on her own, which I guess makes sense as like a single mother character that's like what she wants to do.
But she's also not like a Mary Sue type of character where like she like has all the answers and she can cook a fine dinner.
Yeah, exactly. She's not one-dimensional. Percy asks why she didn't just live with Poseidon. She responds, "He offered to stop the tide for me once. He offered to build me a palace at the bottom of the sea. He thought he could solve all my problems with a wave of his hand. What's wrong with that?" Her multicolored eyes seemed to search inside me. "I think you know, Percy. I think you're enough like me to understand. If my life is going to mean anything, I have to live it myself. I can't let a god take care of me, or my son. I have to find the courage on my own. Your quest has reminded me of that." There's a lot of truth bomb dropping happening in this chapter.
Which, you know what? If you think about it, most kids' books don't do that. You know what I thought when I first read this while we were rereading this?
Yeah.
Was how much funnier would it have been in a kid's narrative of Percy had some ambrosia with him, and because Fat Gabe is fat, he eats it and then explodes.
That would have been a way to go. Or like even if...
And it's like, don't eat that. Hey, is that chocolate? Because, they set it up earlier in the story.
They could have made it more triumphant in a way, or played it for a lighter tone if they were just like, oh, his mom decides, oh, okay, yeah, we are going to use Medusa's head and then turn it against Gabe, and it could have been like this triumphant thing of defeating the evil, but instead it's like this complicated interpersonal relationship situation where she doesn't just want to like murder a guy in cold blood. Also, I'm not sure what they would do after he died. Like, would anybody go looking for him? There's a lot of complicated stuff that would happen.
Well, I mean, if you turn him into stone, it's not like you're hiding a body. Unless, like, you broke the statue in half and there's, like, a corpse inside of it.
If he goes missing and then someone sees a statue of him in your home, there's a lot of...
Well, okay, B, you gotta remember this. What are the odds of someone knowing that Medusa's a real entity that turns people into stone?
Well, I guess they could just think you're creepy and you, like, made a statue of him out of his body or whatever. Like, I don't know. You're some sort of serial killer. I do think that there would be repercussions.
Let's say the FBI gets involved and we're just gonna have an X-ray of the statue. It's going to just be a statue, B. It's not going to have, like, bones or anything.
Or they could be like, oh, humans see what they want to see. So it's like, oh, you murdered him, but first you made a creepy mold of his body. Or you making a statue of him as you confessing to the murder. Whatever. They could justify something.
No, it'd be so stupid. Even, like, you walk in there, hey, that's a really realistic, statue you got there.
Well, I mean, yeah, but there would also be the mysterious aspect of him going missing, because obviously the cops would show up and be like, why do you have a statue of the person who's missing? It is conspicuous. So anyway, Percy's mom decides not to kill Gabe, which is fair, I guess. It's way more complicated than Percy wants it to be, and then he just leaves. And that is how the chapter ends.
No, that's not before the chapter ends. Percy turns and looks at his mom and she winks at him. Then the chapter ends. This chapter is very complicated. Even though there's a lot happening, there's a lot of, I want to say, very adult themes. This is kind of like where Percy Jackson goes from a boy to almost a teenager or to a man.
Yeah, it gets pretty dark in certain parts. And it's definitely, as someone reading these kinds of books, I find it more interesting and fulfilling to read about the interpersonal stuff going on than necessarily like the fight scenes. I think that that's really interesting to see, like, oh, how does this grand, complicated, magical thing affect the smaller human narratives going on underneath? And I like that the way that they handled this was really good, I think. The way that Percy interacts with all the characters with his newfound courage and with this whole new context of what's going on. I think that the characterization is really good. They handle a lot of like really dark themes in a way that isn't too dark, but still like gives it the weight that it deserves.
I think giving it the weight that it deserves is a very powerful message because you could either sweep it under the rug or not talk about it at all. But here, Rick Riordan has that balance between reality and then like heightened fiction.
Yeah, Rick Riordan didn't ever make a joke about any of the things going on. He didn't make a joke about killing Gabe with the Medusa head, or he did. There's places where he could have gone in a more humorous direction that could have been maybe tasteless or a little bit weird, or tried to make it more cartoony, but instead he still acknowledge the complicated situation of like, oh, if Poseidon did say that stuff to Percy about him regretting that he was born, how would that feel to Percy? Would he feel hurt by that? Of course he would. He's a human child. Of course he would be affected by that, even though all this magical stuff is going on. There's still real people's emotions behind it.
I think that's what makes a book and reality. Like, if you can get those two working together, you'll have an amazing book. And that's what I kind of here goes hand in hand rather than, it just being Percy saves the day, gets the Master Bolt, and goes home and everyone eats pancakes.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone has a dance party. Like, they still have to reckon with a lot of the aftermath of about what happened. And I like that. I think that was good. This is probably one of my favorite chapters in the book, actually, because it really feels like we're finally getting some answers to things. We're getting like a lot of complicated fleshing out of how these characters interact with each other within the context of everything going on. I thought it was really well done, and it fit a lot of stuff. Honestly, a lot of things happen. He travels across the country. He's exonerated from all the stuff that he supposedly did. He finds out his mom is still alive. He meets his dad, and he meets Zeus. Like, a lot of stuff is crammed into this one chapter, but I think most of it is handled in a way that makes sense and is really interesting.
And we only have one chapter left.
We only have one chapter.
What is the name of that next chapter?
The prophecy comes true. So I guess something about saving what matters. Did that already happen? Again, I'm not entirely clear.
We're going to read the prophecy one more time. We're going to make our predictions. So next chapter, we'll see if we got them right or not. You ready, B? You shall go west and face the god who has turned. You shall find what was stolen and see it safely returned. You shall be betrayed by the one you call a friend, and you shall fail to save what matters most in the end.
So far, the Oracle is chronological, right? Like, that's like a laundry list of things that have happened, and so far things have been checked off. So he got the thing that was stolen, saw it returned, faced the god who has turned. That was Ares, turns out, not Hades.
You shall find what was stolen, see it safely returned. Obviously, it was the Master Bolt and the Helm of Darkness. You shall be betrayed by one who calls you a friend.
That's the next thing that's going to happen, basically. And then, obviously, it's one chapter left, so those last two things are going to happen in this next chapter.
And you shall fail to save what matters most in the end. Now, what do you think those last two ones are? Because we have all our pieces together now.
Yeah. Oh, geez. All right.
And you know what? I might say some stuff or I might not say some stuff because I'm trying to preserve this book. So you go on and I'm not going to tell you yes or no.
He only has so many friends, right? So it is either Annabeth, Grover, what's his name? The sword fighting guy, Luke, or Chiron, right? That's like the only friends he has.
Yeah, there's also Grover and then there's also, I wouldn't consider Clarice a friend. So maybe
right.
You might
What's
want to
her
check
name?
that
Well, yeah,
one
but
off.
she's not really. I don't think that she's it because that would be too obvious because she's like the kid of Ares, right? And she's already known for being warlike, and it wouldn't make sense. That wouldn't really be a twist, and it would be weird for her to be a friend that is turned.
Okay, so why would it be Annabeth?
Well, Annabeth is too obvious because she's Athena's kid, and Athena and Poseidon have that whole rivalry situation going on, and I think it would just be like too. It doesn't make sense why she would betray him. They've have too much of a rapport. Like there hasn't been any sort of weird moment between them. I feel like there would be more of like a weird foreshadowing moment with all the time they've spent together where she hinted that she was going to betray him somehow. I didn't see that. That's the same kind of justification why I don't think it's Grover. I think I'm leaning more towards Grover if it's going to be the one of the two people he went west with because I guess, I don't know. I mean, like, he knew him in school, though. There's, like, so many reasons why he seems so invested in protecting Percy, so I don't know what motivation he would have for betraying him in any way. Like, and then Luke, we don't really know a lot about, right? Like, that's the only reason that I would give.
But we do know some things about Luke.
Yeah, I don't even remember a lot of the stuff we learned about Luke in the beginning.
He was with Annabeth and Thalia.
Right, he was there with when the whole Thalia thing happened, and then also, I don't know why he would betray Percy, but I also don't, I feel like I don't know a ton about his character because he's not someone who we saw a lot of compared to Grover or Annabeth. He's like still in the running, I would say, and then also Chiron is the other person. I have it between those two, probably.
Okay, then why would it be Chiron?
I guess I don't even like. I'm trying to think of like motivations, and I don't know what kind of like magical motivations would be behind Chiron's.
Is it a magical motivation, a physical motivation,
Yeah, there's
or
a lot
just
of
a motivation in general?
That's true.
Like, it doesn't have to, again, we're thinking of it this way. You think of it like magically. Why would it be magically? Why would it be physically? And why would it be something else?
Yeah, I mean, well, what needs to happen now? Like, he saw the things safely return. Now they just need to figure out something to deal with Kronos, right? So someone's going to betray him somehow with regards to Kronos. I don't really know what's going to happen in the next chapter because he already returned the Master Bolt and the Helm of Darkness. So what really needs to be done? I don't know exactly. I guess they just need to find Kronos. They need to fight him or something, or stop him from...
But how does one kill a god that can't be killed?
Yeah, I don't know.
How does one kill time?
Yeah.
Those are answers that are going to be answered next week, folks.
Yeah, there's... I don't have a definitive guess, but I don't think it's going to be Grover or Annabeth, because I feel like that's too obvious.
So we have a couple emails. So shout out to our very new Patreon sponsor, Brian Dice.
I didn't know we had a new one.
Thank you so much for that. He donated some money, and we really appreciate it. So if you want to send us a message with your questions, because you did do a $3 donation, so we'll do a special episode for you, and you get to pick a bonus episode, just email us. Keep in mind, though, we have to look at the questions first so we can improve them. If not, most of them we'll answer. We have one from Lily. My name is Lily, and I'm a listener from Australia. I really like what you guys have done with the show. Oh, by the way, my friend from school, in which we call Seaweed Brain, is obsessed with Percy Jackson.
That's funny.
Anyway, I hope you get to read this on the show. From Lily, age 12,
Aww.
Australia. Thank you so much, Lily, for this wonderfully adorable message.
Wow. There's a kid in Australia who listens to us. That's so cool.
I mean, that's amazing that we have kids from Australia that listen to us. I'm surprised we have kids that listen from all over the world. It's almost like we're all gonna. Is it the Coca-Cola ad where they all hold hands across the world?
Yeah, I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony.
Yeah, we're all gonna hold hands and talk about Percy Jackson in our orange shirts.
Aw, that's a really sweet thought. It's really awesome, honestly, to see that there are people all over who listen to us, and that was a really nice message. I like that you call your friend Seaweed Brain. That's pretty funny.
So we did get one more email. We're going to read it, except we're not going to read the entire thing of it because we have something special planned. So it's from Artemis. So I really enjoy listening to your podcast on a road trip I took with my parents. In parentheses, I'm a minor. And I needed to kill some time, so I sort of wrote a fan fiction inspired by something Zack said in your review of Chapter 13. I thought you guys might want to read it for this and cringe and lol. Mm-hmm. I hope you don't think I'm a creep for writing this. I was just bored.
I don't think it was creepy. I mean, we read it and it wasn't offensive.
We had so much of a fun laugh, but like in a laugh that like in unit. Actually, if you want to talk about like writing us in character, you got our characters pretty. They're pretty good.
I was like, confusion expressed by me is pretty spot on. I'm confused most of the time, so.
And I'm usually a raving lunatic when it comes to Back to the Future.
Yeah, just a screaming. Yeah, we'll get into that later. So wait, do you want to tell them our plan?
So what we're going to be doing in honor of this wonderful little fan fiction is that B and I and a couple other people in our ensemble are going to make a dramatic version of this, so an audio drama inspired by this fan fiction. So you might expect it either next week or the week after that. It's going to be on Patreon first, but it will be also on every normal feed after that. We did get some iTunes reviews.
Oh yeah, I saw that. So this is from underscore Jackson 2.0. Happy Squeal. I was looking for another podcast to listen to. I thought to look for Percy Jackson, and this is what I found. B, you are in for a lot of surprises later. A lot is going to happen, and it will take you completely by surprise. And congrats to Zack, who hasn't spoiled it. It's really hard to do that, so points to both of you for not spoiling it and trying to not to read it. Thank you for giving me something to listen to. My ears are yours. Noelle Jackson, daughter of Poseidon. P.S. Poseidon broke the oath again. Oops. I like that little thing on the end there. Like the implication, I guess, of saying that you are the child of a different god is that it's like, oh, well, I guess they keep breaking that oath over and over again. They're not that great.
Thank you so much, Noelle, for that lovely iTunes review. We really appreciate it. We have another one that just says, Good by Corey, SSABA. There's nothing, it just says good, which is very short, simple, and gets to the point. It's good.
It's positive, so that's a good thing.
We really appreciate all the iTunes reviews. If you guys want to submit an iTunes review, we'd really appreciate it. It helps us get our numbers up. We're up to way past 50, which I don't even know 50 people. Do you know about 50 people?
Probably, but I probably don't like a lot of 50 people. Like, I don't know.
Not enough 50 people to like actually write really nice reviews. It's just actually all of it is just secretly us. Like trying to think of like clever names for accounts and then clever things to say.
Yeah. Just putting on a mustache, being like, yes, very good, Percy Jackson.
It's like all the different disguises. No, it's like what I think of as like the picture of like all the disguises that can't roll off me when I try to get free trials and everything.
I've definitely seen that meme before.
But we really appreciate that. And if you don't have an iTunes review or social media, you can always email us at radiocamphalfblood@gmail.com and we'll read your review right on the show. Even if it's not just Iris messages, we'll read anything you guys submit to us.
Yeah, you could tweet at us, message us on the Tumblr. Wait, I didn't say that right. The messages on the Tumblr, you know.
B, where can they find you?
You can find me on Tumblr at twinpoetry.tumblr.com, and you can find me on Twitter at bkellygorman.
If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Suda41, that's SUDA41. If you want to email the show, you can email us at radiocamphalfblood@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on Twitter, it is radio_camphalfblood. Well, I think that wraps up the show. It's been a very long and intense episode. And I'm so excited that we are almost done with
so
this.
Close.
And, you know,
one more.
I'm so happy that you're like one of my friends, B, because I can actually explain to them my love of Percy Jackson.
Yeah, now you've lumped me into this fandom whether I like it or not, so now I can talk to you about Percy Jackson. Well, the first book, almost. We're getting there.
Plot twist. Well, this is the last episode, guys.
No. Oh, wouldn't that be mean if we stopped with one chapter left?
I'm Zack.
And I'm B.
And keep staying mortal. Bye.
Bye, guys.